When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing on in our series of why you were wrong about a certain character. Today's is going to be on why you are wrong about Sansa Stark in A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, Sansa is a very divisive character. Some people love this character, some people hate this character, some people just find the character boring just in general. And I want to go through Sansa's arc throughout the 4 books that she's in. She's not in the 5th book, and talk about her as a character. One thing that I've really tried to do as I've done my reread on both this channel, at least with the Game of Thrones, and then I transitioned over to my second channel for A Clash of Kings, is Sansa is a character that is very flawed. And she's much more like a normal child than someone like Arya. I think Arya and Sansa are a lot of the reasons why people dislike Sansa so much, because Arya is much more mature. She's much more adult-like. And so when we see the beginning of a Game of Thrones, and you see the polar differences between the characters, Arya is so unique because of how she's going against the social norms of Westeros in terms of being a girl, a woman in that society. She's somebody that's very much more mature. She's just very different. She has more Stark qualities than she has Tully qualities. And the same cannot be said for Sansa. Sansa is much more childlike. She's someone that has much more, I would say, realistic characteristics of a woman growing up in this type of world, or I should say a girl growing up in this world, because Sansa in the books is a young girl, right? She's not even a teenager at the beginning of A Song of Ice and Fire. So right away, Sansa is a character that is very different from the show, of course, but also she right away is somebody that the audience is not necessarily supposed to like as much as a character like Arya. Let's even think about one of the first big moments that people really dislike Sansa for. So Sansa, yes, to start out the book, also in Arya's first chapter, she's kind of, I would say, bullying / teasing her sister, and always looks at Arya as kind of being an embarrassment because she's not very good at womanly activities, for instance, like sewing and all that kind of stuff. Sansa, very much with Jane Poole, kind of puts her sister down. Now, I don't right away think that this is just like, oh, Sansa's just a bully, all this kind of stuff. You think about Sansa and being a sister. I don't have siblings, but I know siblings grow up very similar like this, having issues with each other, but then loving each other at the very end of the day. And I do think that Sansa loves her sister, but I also think when you're a child, you're a bit more self-concerned. You don't think about other people as much as you do when you grow up. Your empathy levels are usually, as a child, much lower. And that's what's so interesting about Arya, is that Arya is the complete opposite. Arya is very empathetic of people. She can show amazing qualities of self-reflection and seeing the flaws within herself, or even taking more responsibility than she should. Getting to, for instance, when we get to the trident, Sansa is somebody that, well, what does she do? She goes against Arya, she takes Joffrey's side, and she lies about everything that kind of happened there. She doesn't necessarily lie, but she just says, I don't know what happened, which we know to be a lie. She doesn't straight out and back Joffrey's story. But what I think is so interesting about that moment is Ned even tells Arya, like, what was Sansa supposed to do? Sansa has been, one, betrothed to Joffrey, so this is the person that she's going to marry, that she's going to be with for the rest of her life. If you really want to start out the relationship, being antagonistic towards Joffrey, not a good sign. Let's also remember, even with everything that happens with Joffrey, Sansa has a major crush on him. And you gotta remember, Sansa is very young. This is probably one of the first crushes she's ever had. She's not seeing the red flags, the warning signs that a lot of the other people are, because she's blinded by, well, her attraction, her surface level, love for Joffrey. And so there's a number of things that play into it. It's not as simple as just saying Sansa should have backed Arya, all this stuff, because Ned is going to put her into a situation in which, let's be honest, really Catelyn and Lewin put Sansa in, with Sansa being betrothed to Joffrey. Robert also puts Ned into that corner. Sansa doesn't have a lot of options. And so Sansa, unfortunately for this, she gets punished by losing Lady. Now, this should be a huge sign as well that maybe Sansa should not trust people like Joffrey and Cersei, given Cersei is the one that has Lady killed. Now, we know right away that Sansa is still going to idolize Cersei. She's going to still have a good perception of Joffrey. So let's skip to then when they get to King's Landing. How do both Sansa and Arya then react to the situation that happened on the Trident? Arya is very self reflective. She's very much looking at herself and saying, I caused all of this. She's a little too hard on herself. She takes too much guilt for everything that happened. Like she is not responsible for things that Joffrey and Cersei did, but she takes a lot on herself about how Micah was killed because of this, because of her asking, Micah to, play swords with her more or less. Whereas Sansa is the very opposite. And this leads to a lot of reasons why people don't like Sansa. Sansa is very much, I'm going to blame everybody else besides myself. She blames Arya for everything and almost feeds into what Arya is already thinking, that she has a lot to be blamed for in terms of what happened at the Trident. So Sansa shows a lot of signs of not being self-reflective, of not being, empathetic to others, and not being able to understand what she, did at the Trident and how that affected that situation. And so a lot of people are right away going to read the character and go, wow, Sansa is a horrible person. Let's go back to all of you guys when you were 12, when you were 13, when you were 14, when you were very young. I hate to say this, but children are just this way. Sansa much more is portrayed as a normal child would act. Children do not think of things like that and go, "Oh yeah, I should take all this accountability for my actions and, think about self-reflection." Those are things that happen more when you mature and you get older. And so I don't think we should hate Sansa because Sansa is acting very much based upon her situation, how she's brought up by Catelyn, believing all these southern tales and how, life truly is. That's the way she's grown up. That's how noble ladies grow up. Sansa is not unique in that sense of it. And that's what I think another thing that draws people against Sansa. Sansa is not the most unique character in the world. She's basically a traditional noble girl growing up in this world and thrust into a horrible situation and the issues that she is going to have to go through throughout book 2, book 3, and then even into book 4 in the future. Sansa is not a character that we should just hate because of these things. Now, do I think that Sansa has a lot of things that she should work on and grow as a person? Yes, 1000%. And that kind of leads us more into as we get through a Game of Thrones. Obviously, Sansa kind of informing on Ned's plans to Cersei, very tone deaf. Ned's trying to send you away for a reason, but let's also be frank. Ned does not tell Sansa really at all why they're going back up north. He says, well, it's dangerous. If Ned had actually described what was happening here and why he was sending them back, maybe Sansa doesn't flip on Ned. And Sansa also at the same time, you gotta be thinking, well, she shouldn't be trusting Cersei regardless based upon Lady being killed. Again, she's a young child. She's idolizing Cersei as this beautiful queen, something that she's trying to be. She's going to be a queen with Joffrey. She's somebody that doesn't really get the whole situation of what's going on. She doesn't understand how evil and how morally corrupt people can be. And that's something that's just never instilled with her, with Catelyn. And Catelyn, for all you want to say about Catelyn, I don't think she's a terrible mother or any of those things. I just think that Catelyn raised Sansa in a certain way where she hid her from the darker sides of life. And she never experienced that. And that's not uncalled for. That's how a lot of ladies are raised in Westeros. We see that all over the place. And so I think Sansa, when you get to a Game of Thrones and you see her, she is a lot more intelligent than I think we give her credit for, especially for being a child. Let's even think about when Sansa is going to, in front of the entire court, plead for her father's life. Sansa does it very, very smartly. Because instead of Sansa worrying about everybody else's opinions, Cersei, Varys, all these other people on the council, Sansa is in this position where she realizes Joffrey holds all of the power. I need to go to Joffrey and I need to convince him that Ned should be spared. And that's what she does. And she would have been successful if it wasn't for Littlefinger playing the exact same game, realizing that he has to twist Joffrey to kill Ned. So Sansa is very intelligent in that regard. She understands that what she has to do. And Sansa is also very intelligent, understanding she has to play the role of a lady to survive in Westeros. She has to just endure everything that's being thrown her way, whether it's mental, physical, any of that kind of abuse that Sansa's going to go through throughout the first, 3 books, as well as book 4 with Littlefinger as well. I do want to point out, a lot of people look at Sansa and look at her as being a boring POV. Sansa is a character that, unfortunately, she hasn't really had her time to shine yet. And I think that Winds of Winter, I don't know if she's going to get a lot of chapters or a lot of time, but I think that that book will be a lot more of her time to shine than the other books have been. And the way George writes Sansa reflects where Sansa really is as a character. Sansa is a trapped character. She has no real ability to act or control what's going on around her. She's a hostage to the Lannisters. She's being used and manipulated by everyone. And that's very much reflected in the way we see her written as a character. Because in book 1, book 2, even book 3 to some extent, until after the Purple Wedding, she is used as a pawn, or she's used as a side POV. And what do I mean by a side POV? Sansa is not the main POV of King's Landing in any of those books. She is very much a supplemental POV to Ned. In book 1, we get a heavy dosage of Ned in book 1. And what does George do? To make sure we're not having 20 to 30 chapters of Ned, he gives us chapters with Arya and Sansa to supplement the content, to give us a change of pace, to go to a different perspective, while also forwarding the King's Landing plot. And so that's the way that Sansa fits into the plot for the first 3 books, really. And I think each individual book, she gets more and more time to grow as a side character in terms of, okay, this is a character that's trapped, but is slowly starting to gain, closer to getting out of King's Landing and all of that kind of stuff. So when we get to then book 2, as Sansa has gone through this arc in book 1, and she's realizing what she's going to have to be, and she's learned quite a lot from being in King's Landing, she's still not there though. Like, Sansa is still a young girl. While yes, she's experienced all these tragedies, she's seeing how King's Landing really works, she still doesn't understand King's Landing fully. And that really comes out in terms of the Dantos plot going on, and even the way that people try to help her, but she's just not willing to trust anyone because of everything she's experienced, that she pushes people away. For instance, Tyrion tries to help Sansa in Sansa 3. This is the chapter in which Joffrey has like a crossbow to her. She's being stripped naked in front of the entire court because of what Robb's done in the West. And so in this moment, Tyrion kind of saves her, tries to save all this humiliation that's going on, puts Joffrey in his place, and then also trying to, maybe say, Sansa, if you need a place, you can be harbored here in the Tower of the Hand. Nobody will hurt you, and will keep you away from Joffrey. Sansa denies this for a number of reasons. One, she doesn't want to anger Joffrey further, but she also doesn't know Tyrion. He's another Lannister to her, and even though he might have saved her, what was Tyrion trying to do? Was he trying to manipulate Sansa further? All of that kind of stuff. And so book 2, in a lot of ways, for Sansa, is about trust, and who can she trust? And it's her being given opportunities to get out of the situation she's in, but she doesn't take them. So for instance, Tyrion, if we get to the end of the book with the Battle of the Blackwater, and we see the Hound coming to try and take Sansa away, Sansa denies that. And for one reason is the Hound is somebody that's not viewed as being a beautiful knight, somebody that Sansa can trust, all of this type of stuff. That's another really big part of book 2, where Sansa is still trying to understand that physical beauty does not mean somebody is a good person. It's a lesson she's really going to learn in the next book as well, with the Tyrells, and how the Tyrells also try to manipulate and use her as a piece of the Game of Thrones. And so Sansa is this character that I think Sansa goes on a really interesting journey, especially when we get into book 3. I think book 2 does a good job of setting up Sansa for really her main arc. As book 4, she doesn't really have that much of an arc, just given the fact she only has 3 chapters in the last 2 books. So as we go through, book 2, I think Sansa is a very understandable character. Why does she feel such, anger towards other characters? Why does she feel so spiteful, or somebody that is not pleasant to be around? It's the situation she's in. She's being abused. She has no freedom. Everything goes wrong for Sansa. And a lot of people will say, well, maybe rightly so, because of all the bad actions and things she thinks about in book 1. Another thing, she also doesn't think the nicest things of Jane Poole. But again, you got to remember, Sansa's a young kid, and everything around her is crumbling. And that's really the whole point of Sansa, especially through the first 3 books, is that her whole worldview is shattered. Everything she believed about the world, she's now come to realize is wrong. And so as we get into book 3, I think is where the criticism really starts to get up there for Sansa. I don't think there's as much criticism for Sansa in book 2. I think it's mainly book 1 and book 3. But when you get into book 3, the major point that you run into for Sansa is just think about everything going on. So Sansa, beginning of the book, we have the Tyrell plot with her, trying to get her to marry Willis Tyrell, She would get to go to Highgarden, even though Willis Tyrell is not the most great candidate. He's not like a great knight. He's actually been crippled by Oberyn Martell. It's not the best person to marry, but Willis Tyrell, he's a very powerful person. He's one day going to rule Highgarden. He's going to have a lot of power and wealth. Also, it would get Sansa out of King's Landing, this place that has all these horrible traumas there for her. It would get her far away from Joffrey. It seems like the perfect solution. And then everything we talked about in book 2 about how Sansa's not able to trust people and she doesn't know who to trust. The one person that she does trust in Dantos is the person that destroys that dream of possibly living at Highgarden and marrying Willis. And then you have everything falling apart for Sansa. The rest of the book, Sansa is just falling apart and being knocked down peg after peg. And firstly, that means Tyrion and Sansa's marriage. And so many people criticize Sansa and her actions in the book and the show. The show very much changes Sansa to be a lot more nice to Tyrion in terms of like kneeling down during the wedding ceremony to help because of Tyrion's height, and Joffrey takes the little stand thing to put the cloak over her. The book, that does not happen. Sansa stands there and does not let that happen. She is not willing to do that. And even in the book, Tyrion thinks like, why couldn't you have just done that for me? And you also then go to during the moment where Tyrion is basically being humiliated by Joffrey. Joffrey, pouring wine on Tyrion during the Purple Wedding. In the show, we actually see a scene where Sansa helps Tyrion, giving him the chalice, and you can see that the two have bonded. Even if you look in the show, Tyrion and Sansa have this great scene in the show where they're actually bonding together. They're talking about how to prank people, all that kind of stuff. That never really happens in the book. Sansa is miserable, and rightly so. Sansa has been thinking about her marriage day or her wedding for her whole life. And just as she's about to be happy, going to live in Highgarden, be married into the Tyrells, a family she likes, getting out of King's Landing, and she has to marry, by all accounts, one of the most unattractive people in A Song of Ice and Fire, in Tyrion. This is not the show. In the show, Peter Dinklage, a very attractive man. In the book, that is not the case at all. Tyrion has mismatched eyes, his hair color all over the place. He has basically taken an injury from the Battle of the Blackwater. He basically doesn't have a nose at this point. Tyrion is a mess. And again, everything's not about physical stuff, all of that, but you do have to, in my opinion, be in some level attracted to your partner. This is not the case. Sansa is not attracted to Tyrion. Tyrion is a Lannister, and his family has only treated her badly. And we know Tyrion himself has not, but it doesn't really matter. Sansa has been pushed into this marriage she never wanted to get into. It's the rest of her life. Sansa is thinking for the rest of her life she's going to have to marry and live with Tyrion, somebody she doesn't want to. And of course Sansa is going to be spiteful of this. Of course she's not going to want to help Tyrion and all these things, even though Tyrion is trying his best to form a relationship with Sansa, to be nice to her, to be kind to her, not doing the bedding ceremony. That doesn't mean that Sansa needs to then instantly like Tyrion. That's the way I look at it. Like, Sansa realizes, once again, she's been forced by the Lannisters, and she's being manipulated, and she's being used as a pawn. Now, the Tyrells were doing the same thing to Sansa, but at least in that form, like, Sansa could see a good end. Sansa could see a good future for herself, and she had an option. It wasn't like the Tyrells forced her into marrying Willis. It was Sansa's choice. Now, the Tyrells do a very good job of presenting that choice, but you look at everything that happens there, and I don't blame Sansa as much as I think a lot of people in the community do about her actions in A Storm of Swords and how she treats Tyrion, for instance. So we then get to Sansa. She then leaves the Purple Wedding. She basically leaves Tyrion out to dry, makes Tyrion look even more guilty. I want to throw out once again, even if Sansa had stayed, it still would not have made Tyrion look any less guilty, because even if the two are saying, oh yeah, we weren't involved, everyone believed they were involved already anyway. Sansa being there just likely would have gotten herself killed. And so what was Sansa really supposed to do? Like, stay here and allow herself to probably be killed with her husband, or escape this place where the Lannisters have controlled your life for the last, couple books, and you've been able to do nothing. And now you're finally given a chance at freedom where your family has been killed. The Lannisters have done that, regardless of Tyrion and how he's treated you. There's nothing left for, Sansa at King's Landing. And even at this point, Sansa delves into some deep topics throughout the series in terms of, mental health. She thinks about suicide at points of the series. And At this point, Sansa has nothing left. So of course she's going to leave. Now, that's when the next part of the abuse starts, where Sansa might think she's free. Now she's being used by Littlefinger. Now, does Sansa have more freedom than she had before? And is she learning how to play the game and, kind of stand up for herself and all those type of things? 100%. But let's not also forget the idea that Littlefinger is still using a lot of abuse on Sansa, right? Sansa's a young girl, and Littlefinger is trying to make advances on her, grooming her, all that kind of stuff. And Littlefinger is using Sansa to his own gains. Now, I think Sansa eventually will outsmart Littlefinger, of course, but it's still the same idea. Sansa is this character that's been trapped throughout the entire series, and a lot of her actions, in my opinion, make a lot of sense. Does that mean I love Sansa as a character? No, Sansa's not one of my favorite characters. She really never has been. But I also don't think that she's this character that I hate, that I cannot stand. She's a character that I think is fine. She's never been the main character of any of the books. That's not ever been her role. She's a character that's being groomed into being a main character of the series. And so I look at Sansa as a character, and I think that she has flaws. I think she's more realistically written than a character like Arya, for instance. So if you want to just go in terms of who is like more naturally written, Sansa or Arya, it's 100% Sansa, especially given their ages. And yeah, I wanted to take this time because, well, you guys wanted me to talk about Sansa. I did a poll for you guys to figure out which one you wanted me to talk about, and I'm kind of happy Sansa won. We don't talk about Sansa a lot on this channel, and I know there's a lot of people in my community that don't like Sansa, so this was my best attempt at defending Sansa, kind of explaining some of her actions, especially some of the more controversial ones. And let me know what you guys think. Again, I'm not a big supporter of Sansa. This is not a video I'm necessarily as like I have a very strong opinion on. Like the Catelyn video, I'm very strong opinion on Catelyn. Sansa, again, I think she's a good character. I don't hate her, don't love her. She's just, she's a solid, good George R. R. Martin character. But thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.